I have dedicated my professional career to the study and control of arthropods.
Okay, again, I'm part 3 of my response to Empty Without Jesus' comments. Again, I'll put links up in the sidebar for all of these. You comment on about the sexes here, about how do I know about the evolution of the sexes. I mean, obviously I don't. I mean, nothing in science is 100% indisputable fact. We don't create dogma, believe it or not. We actually, are open to reinterpretation. Anyway, but one of the things about this, and this will address your next couple of comments as well. When we look at life in general, we can organize life on a scale of it's not evolved or less evolved, it's derived or not derived, primitive to advanced, and advanced doesn't mean better. It's a biological term that means more specialized. Okay, humans are actually in the evolutionary scale. We're not very advanced, meaning we retain a lot of primates in general retain primitive traits within the mammal clade. Okay, things like whales are highly derived because they're modified from the ancestral form. We still have 5 fingers and 5 toes. Most advanced mammals have lost fingers and toes, for example. And don't think advanced means better or anything like that. Our brains are highly derived, highly advanced. But it doesn't. It's a different meaning. So don't get off on the terms, please. But when we look at life from primitive to advanced, we find that primitive things, things that genetically come into the more basal stem of animals, things like flatworms, jellyfish, these kinds of things that are closer to. They're not the ancestor. They're closer to that ancestor in terms of morphology and genetics. We find that those things tend to have the primitive sexual system when they sexually reproduce, which is the gametes, sperm and egg, are exactly the same size and the same shape. There's no difference between them. Okay? It's just 2 gametes with sexless gametes that fuse together and form a thing. When we see in advanced, even within those types, advanced flatworms, advanced things, we see these structures become more and more egg and sperm-like, meaning one of them becomes smaller and more mobile, one of them becomes larger and less mobile, contains more nutrients. That's where the real evolution of the sexes takes place. What we see in these primitive things, we see in these single-celled animals, the protozoans, is we see that different what we call mating types. They're not true because there's the whole animal, the whole thing. We see mating types that diverge from each other. We see Chlamydomonas has these different mating types, some of which are more mobile, some of which are more nutrient-rich. Anyway, we can infer. Okay, it's an inference, and it's not just guessing in the dark, because then once we make an inference, we can then test that inference by altering conditions. Okay, we find that when we alter conditions, we can force these things to become we can force these mating types to become more like sperm and egg, simply by changing their environment to such a thing that would foster that. Anyway, that's I'll maybe put a link up. No, I'm not going to bother. Screw it. If you search through my sexual biology video series, I've got a one on the evolution of the sexes. Again, if you're interested, it's a great topic. Let's see where I'm at. You were talking about, that's right. Blood came first. Your opinion? Okay. No, it's not my opinion. We look at primitive things. The most primitive metazoans, things that are not single-celled, have no blood. Okay? Seawater flows through their bodies, bringing oxygen and nutrients. If they swallow something that just passively rots isn't the right word. It gets broken down and then it just diffuses to their cells. There's nothing carrying it, just seawater that's flowing through their bodies in and out. They're leaky. When we get to the next thing, we get these contained things. They actually have fluid in their bodies that's different than seawater. It's maintained at a different ion balance than seawater slightly. Okay. I don't know if you're old enough to remember the Hemo the Magnificent, where they told little kids it was a cartoon they used to show us about health about how blood is the same as seawater. It's completely false. Blood is very different than seawater. But anyway, the point is that in those things where they have true blood that carries it, primitive blood, again, is just fluid that doesn't have any cells in it that carries ions and things to different places in the animal's body. And then we get more advanced ones where there's actually amoebic type cells, they're called amoebocytes, that actually will grab particles of food, carry them through that fluid, put them into certain places in the animal's body where they're needed. Then, in the next advanced things, and these are more complex animals, like mollusks, for example, you get the coelomic concept, but part of the coelom is forms vessels. It forms tubes, so that this flow of nutrients isn't just flowing through in between the cells. It's actually directed. Okay. When you advance that further, you get shunts in that direction system, so you can actually really control it. And then in earthworms, you get thickened portions of these vessels that pump. So we see this progression, and you can say, okay, did one lead to the other? No, but it certainly looks that way. It certainly looks like every possible intermediate step in if it didn't happen that way, we have these things, and it doesn't. Again, and just so in case you get mixed up on this, if something has a blood vessel with a muscle on it that pumps slightly, that's not on its way to being a heart. It doesn't need to be better than that. When things get larger, because of the actual laws of physics, larger things have to have a little bit more, a stronger muscles to pump. Eventually, you can see that in the continuum of life becoming more specialized. Part of the blood vessel becomes a pumping muscle that we would then call a heart. Anyway, transitional fossils, you say it again, that's my opinion. Of course, it's not my opinion, but it's a lot of other people's opinions as well. You got to explain it. Okay, let's discard evolution, creation, everything. Discard it altogether. Okay, let's not even look at it. Let's look at when you find an animal, a fossilized animal, like Kent Hovind loves to say, all you know is that it died. Okay, we know it died. We know that it was buried and that somehow it became a fossil, right? How do you explain a fossil whale that's got back legs on it, non-functioning back legs, complete with a pelvis, femur, tibia, fibula, kneecap, and little toes with hooves on the end of them? Things like Basilosaurus, an extinct whale. How do you explain that? How would you, as a creationist, explain why there is an aquatic animal that has stuck to its sides these trailing little flipper legs that are completely useless? Evolution can explain that. Evolution can explain that is a transitional phase from functioning legs, what we see in some of the like Ambulocetus and some of the other primitive whales, and modern whales, which have only the hip embedded into the tissue. Although, again, there's another explanation. We get these. There have been, I think it's right whales that actually have part of the leg bones, but then there's also several times, and I'm not talking about that dolphin, but even that's another good example. I'm talking about whalers, and these are preserved in the museum, have found completely formed hind limbs embedded in the body wall of whales. It's an avatism, where it's just something, for whatever reason, mistake, genes that are supposed to turn off don't turn off at the right time during development, and it grows a pair of back legs, little tiny back legs, just like we see in these Basilosauruses. Okay, it's an opinion, but how would you explain that? How would you explain the fact that chickens have the genes for forming teeth, a full maxilla and teeth? The genes are there. We can turn them on. We can actually activate those genes and create a chicken embryo that grows teeth. God made the chicken, made birds, decided, I'll put this gene in there just in case, as a backup, as an adaptation. I mean, it doesn't. You have to really stretch to explain it in a strict creationist. And I'm not saying godless. I'm talking about it's just if you want to explain it in the young Earth creationist sense, you have to really do. You have to stretch to explain these things. And it would be one thing if there's just a few examples, but they're everywhere. Everywhere we look, human beings have we have the genes to produce eggs. I mean, like leathery shelled eggs, to make eggshells, to make albumin and all that other stuff that goes into an egg. Why do we have those genes? They're turned off, but they're there. Anyway, I'm going to end this. I guess I'll make part 4.